Now, 2 years ago this month, security forces in Iran carried out one of the most brutal and repressive crackdowns in the country's modern history. Protests erupted in dozens of towns and cities, initially in response to a fuel price hike, but they quickly morphed into a wider protest against the Islamic regime. An estimated 1,500 people were killed, among them 17 teenagers and 400 women. It's been dubbed Bloody November by Iranian activists, and many say the crackdown has not received the attention it deserves in the world media. Well, my next guest believes the West, especially the UK, should take stronger action against the regime over the killings. Kasra Arabi is an Iran analyst at the Tony Blair Institute. Thank you very much for being with us. So you're calling essentially on the UK to use targeted sanctions against the regime. Some might say Iran is already under some of the heaviest sanctions in history. How could this help?
Sure, thanks, Laura. So on the anniversary of Bloody November, earlier this week, we called on the British government to take action against Iran's regime through Magnitsky sanctions, and we identified 10 regime officials for the UK to target. Crucially, these are individuals from high level, who have held high office, such as Mohammad Azad Jahromi, former IT minister who imposed an internet blackout to censor the bloodshed on the streets, right down to the grassroots level, such as Leila Barsari, governor of Quds City, who boasted on TV that she gave the orders to shoot at civilians. Now, Magnitsky sanctions both have symbolic importance in that they show Britain is a force for good and that it will uphold democratic values abroad, but also they have practical importance, imposing asset freezes and travel bans on such individuals. Now, that's very important, and it can be an effective way to target Iranian regime officials. Why? Well, much like the former Soviet Union, Iran's regime, the Islamic Republic, is an ideological regime that is corrupt to its core. While Iranian regime officials enforce a hardline Islamist order on the Iranian people, they, their families, their sons, their daughters, the Aghazadehs, as we call them in Farsi, enjoy lavish lifestyles abroad. They travel to the West to enjoy the freedoms of the Western world. So these targeted sanctions can really hit these officials where it hurts. And that itself can act as a deterrent for future human rights abusers the next time the Iranian people take to the streets.
Well, this is all very well, but it comes at a really sensitive time for the UK in that the government of Boris Johnson is under a lot of pressure to pay a £400 million debt to Tehran in order to get the Iranians to free the British citizen Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe. Is this really the right time to rock the boat with Tehran?
Well, Iran's regime has a state hostage-taking policy. It does not behave like a normal nation state. It uses hostage-takings, hijackings, terrorism, and militancy as tools of its diplomacy. Targeted Magnitsky sanctions shows that these actions do not and will not go without consequences. It sends a clear message to Khamenei's regime that the West will not tolerate this, and crucially, it sends an important message to the Iranian people that the West will stand by them in their struggle for basic rights. The Free Nazanin group itself has also called for Magnitsky sanctions, so I don't see Magnitsky sanctions which are targeted against human rights abusers and acts of unprovoked aggression. I actually see this as showing to Khamenei's regime, make it absolutely clear that there will be consequences for such actions.
And just very briefly, Kasra, because we are in the run-up to the international talks on Iran's nuclear programme, Tehran's calling for all sanctions to be lifted before it curbs any of its nuclear activities. Tehran is really holding all the cards going into these negotiations, isn't it?
Well, I would actually say that the Iranian regime is presenting itself as though it has a lot of cards in its hands, but actually Tehran has a very weak hand. Economic sanctions are significantly bringing the Iranian economy to its knees. All Tehran has is escalation, and it's using nuclear escalation, regional militancy, hijackings, etc., as tools of these intimidations. Tehran believes it can intimidate the West into granting it more concessions. And actually, these targeted sanctions against regime officials sends a clear message that there will be consequences for unprovoked acts of aggression and human rights abuses.
Kasra, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you very much indeed. Kasra Arabi there.